Technology isn't just a part of our everyday lives anymore. It's become a frontier for global powers, with India right in the mix. So why not join the conversation? Take the Technopolitik survey, created by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. It's just 10 simple questions, but your answers could help shape India's strategy in navigating the fast-changing world of high-tech geopolitics. Your voice matters, so let's make it heard. The link is in the bio.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello everyone, this is the second and the final part of the episode on municipal corporation elections. In the first, we talked about the various problems of local governance, how misaligned incentives in politicians and bureaucrats mean that urban governance is sidelined. The link to the first part is in the show notes. In this one, we dive deep into municipal corporation election delays, what influences them, and how we might be able to solve them. Enjoy! So let's dive into our main topic, which is your thesis on, the irregularities of elections in ULBs. So why don't you start with the extent of delays, how prevalent they are, and is it really a major problem? How major is it across India, regions of India, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was the question that I set out with, because everything we spoke about, right, that finances are not under control, different powers are taken away, all of this is known and people talk about it. And the fact that people don't know too much about urban local elections, again, known, voting percentages are lower, all of those things. But I was coming from a point of view that what if the elections just happened on time, and these elections were as on time as the other state and national elections? Would that make any difference? So I just wanted to know about the extent of delays, and as you said, how big of an issue is it? So here's what I did. So I didn't find any single source of all the different corporations, and there's a reason for that. In different states legislate on it differently. They have a different parameter to recognize something as a corporation.
Okay.
So if you Googled, if you Googled how many municipal corporations are there in India, I would doubt any website will tell you that answer, straight. But anyway, I started right from there, right from scratch.
Okay.
I went state by state, looked at every single corporation that, exists. Some have been there for a long time. Some have been recently converted to a corporation, upgraded to a corporation because their population increased.
Right.
And I found that I have not rounded it, but coincidentally, at the time that I was doing my study, there were exactly 250 municipal corporations in India.
Okay.
And while I am referring to the problems faced by urban local body elections, I think this is a bit technical, but urban local bodies are much more than municipal corporations. So municipal corporations are just the biggest urban local bodies. There are actually around, if I'm not wrong, around 4,000 urban local bodies in India. So it includes like your town, like a municipality is also a type of urban local body. Your Zilla Parishad, Nagar Parishad. Some of these transition local governance bodies are also classified as urban local bodies.
4,000 different types of urban local
because
bodies.
even your municipalities are considered as like they're not a panchayat, they're not a rural body, it's a urban
tiers
space. So it in fact speaks about just the extent of transition that India is going through. So each of these urban local bodies could at some point in the future be a corporation. The place could get as big as a city, as a corporation. So that's why 10 years back there were no 250 corporations. There have been some corporations which got converted into a corporation 3 years back, 4 years back, once they crossed that threshold. So anyway, coming back to the study itself, once I identified that there were 250 corporations across the entire country, I went state by state, corporation by corporation to pull out data of all the elections that existed between 1994 to 2024, which was a 30-year period, after which the municipal corporation legislation was strengthened. So I'm referring to the Nagarpalika Act, or the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was passed in 1992. And 1992 was when at a union level, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, everyone agreed that, hey, look, we need to strengthen our urban local governance. Let's, have this Nagar Palika Act. And what they did was they didn't drive down things to the T, but in the spirit of decentralization and the fact that India is kind of a federation of states, in kind of that belief, they said that, hey, we will legislate and give you an overarching framework of you should have a corporation, you should have an election, this should be the constitution, this should be the reservation for women, for other castes, that kind of thing. So they gave the whole framework and they said, beyond this, every state needs to have your own corporation act, which will give it the teeth and actual implementation, and you can adapt this based on the needs of your state.
Right.
So that was at that time considered like a great move because you are allowing states to decentralize. Now, did that come with problems? We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But in 1992, this was passed, and 93 was when states had to ratify it and had to pass some local legislation, and 1994 was the date by which every single state was supposed to have a local corporation act and have timely elections and have everything else. So I'm considering that period onwards, like 1994 to 2024, 250 corporations, and I was able to pull out data for 679 elections across these 250 corporations.
Okay.
Now, it was a painstaking process. Some states had published kind of a document like an election report after every election. So then I could just look at one report and see what happened in 94, 99, 2004, 2009, that kind of a thing. But this was just a handful of states. Most states had no record available. So I called state election commission by state election commission. I asked them, hey, what happened? When was your last election before, 2010? Was there anything in 95, 96? He was like, sir, we have no idea. हमें तो कुछ भी पता नहीं. हमारे पास record भी नहीं है. पता. And this is the state election.
They don't have a record.
Some states don't have, records. And some of them said, हमारे पास तो नहीं है, शायद कहीं और है, आप आ जाओ यहाँ पर. So some guy, if they're sitting in Orissa or Jharkhand and they're telling me, okay, you come here and then we'll see if we have it or not. Me, this lone wolf sitting in Bangalore trying to find data for all corporation elections.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is, my methodology might not be the most robust. I was, alone. There might be some elections here and there that I got, that I missed, that I got wrong. But we are focusing on the broader trends. Okay, so I looked at news articles. I looked at some regional articles. In some states where the state election had no records, there was some Marathi newspaper which had an online archive saying in 1998 or something. There was something.
Right.
So I did everything possible. Scrounged media reports, government reports, election commission reports, and tried to find as much as possible. And then I kind of put together different parameters of when the election happened, were there delays, who was in power, what was the type of the state, what was the reason, kind of almost like 40 variables which I constructed, and took 2 months of a lot of hours every day and some help from, interested like members, colleagues, that kind of a thing. As much help as I could, I took it and had this database of 679 elections. And then I was like, okay, now we have it. Let's see how big is the problem of, elections. And the results were like shocking. I knew that elections are delayed, but I didn't know, it's to that extent. And long story short, I found that almost 60% of elections to municipal corporations in India were delayed, which means that more elections were delayed than the ones that happened on time. Right? Yeah. And it was absolutely shocking. And then I went a little bit further. Yeah. What if some delays are shorter delays for whatever reason? Again, unacceptable, but what if, So then I classified kind of up to a 6-month delay as a shorter delay. Maybe there was some disagreement, some emergency, giving the benefit of doubt. So then I kind of, separated the two, and I found that still there were 41.2% of elections to corporations in India which had a long delay, which means there was kind of broken local governance and a dysfunctional system for more than 6 months, so many times across the country. So yeah, that was kind of the shocking result. and I tried to look at different parameters, all of that. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, we can discuss.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think this result itself will take time to digest.
Digest.
It's been over a year since I did this research, and every time I speak about it, I still find it shocking.
Yeah.
How can 60%? Exactly. If I want to put it across, it's looking like 56.9%. So I have all the data, everything available. If anyone's ever interested, you can hit me up. I can share. Happy to share this.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a shocking amount of
number. Yeah.
elections delayed. So yeah, I'm just digesting that.
Wow. Okay. I mean, imagine 60% of union elections getting delayed, or 60% of state elections getting delayed. I mean, it's almost unimaginable. So, were there like trends across these elections? So, say one possible trend might be metropolitan cities had better elections, or richer states, or bigger states, or states with higher populations had lesser delays, or states that had devolved more powers to the local government had lesser delays, something to kind of put a little balm on the injury.
Absolutely, this was the question that I went out with. Once we I learned the extent of delays, that was the next question that had to be answered, right? What causes delays? Is it, as you said, I went out with something like 30 different hypotheses on maybe if it's a well-off state with a higher GDP, maybe it's more or less likely than a lower GDP. Then I looked at population, as you said, bigger the state, maybe lesser the chance of a delay. So I went with hypotheses like this and pulled out different factors, like how recent is the corporation, which political party was in power, and maybe depending on where the state is. So what if it's a state governed by a national political party versus a regional political party, and what is the kind of caste composition in that state. So looked at a bunch of factors, and I found that there was in fact nothing which gave a strong correlation to explain this delay. So I even looked at some of the state-wise variation, right? So someone listening to this might be curious to know which state did best and which state did worst. So for example, there were, I think, 3 states which had a kind of a relatively better performance in terms of timely elections, and that was Himachal Pradesh, where only 11% of the elections in the period had been delayed.
Only.
I mean, now we have to be kind to those who have defaulted lesser, but also perhaps smaller state, fewer corporations. So that could just actually be one election somewhere. But more meaningfully, Maharashtra and Rajasthan both had 29% of their corporation elections delayed. So you were speaking about that earlier. There was a time when no corporations were in force. But those were our top performers. Only 30%.
Only 30%.
That was Maharashtra and Rajasthan.
Wow,
and on the other hand, UP and Karnataka were the states with the highest percentage of delayed elections. And in UP, 97% of the corporation elections were delayed. And in Karnataka, that was 96% of the corporation elections, which means that almost every time there was a corporation election, there was some reason or the other to be delayed. 96 and 97 we are talking about. And if someone's lived in Bangalore, again, we are sitting here, if we look at it, the BBMP, which is Bengaluru's corporation, election was supposed to happen in 2020, hasn't happened. Was supposed to happen in 2015. It was delayed by 6 months. So it was supposed to happen in March 2015, some infighting, and then happened in September or October 2015. And then before that, in 2010, the BBMP election happened, but it was supposed to happen when? In 2006. So there was a 3.5-year delay between 2006 to 10 when they said, we'll make the corporation bigger, we'll include more areas, and no one could agree on what to include, what not to include. So I think this also makes sense, just anecdotally, if we think about it. But so these were some of the states which had some, abnormal number of elections that were delayed. But there's another way to look at this. Is when they were delayed, how long were they delayed for? So while, Karnataka had many elections that were delayed, it looked like they were kind of for relatively shorter periods, whereas the states like Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, for example, their average delay is something like 1,100 days. So in terms of the extent of delay, and of course, there's another outlier. For example, Jammu and Kashmir. That you understand, right? There,
right.
the average delay is like 10 years or something. So they've only had 1 or 2 elections.
In
But
the 30 years.
yeah, I think that we cannot compare to the rest. But like Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, some states in the northeast, Assam, for example, these were states that while they didn't have that high a percentage of delays, probably because they have lesser corporations or whatever. When there were delays, it was for a long time, almost 1,000 days of delay, like 2-3 years of delay, and every time. So in the past 30 years, for every election, on average, they've had 3 years of delay.
Delays, right.
Right. So that's, I think, what convinced me that this is like a huge problem. It's not a Bangalore problem. It's not a Chennai problem. It's not a Hyderabad problem, but it's an all India problem. So then I started thinking about what is it that's, causing it. So yeah, I think that was the next step of my research.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a metropolitan problem. It's not a tier 2 problem. It's not a rich state problem.
Yeah, it's not like if people of that state have a higher voter turnout, they care more. So then, so it's not even that. It's nothing. You might think, what if it's regional party versus national party in power? Nothing, no difference. Whether Congress is in power or BJP was in power, nothing. It was like maybe 3-4 percentage points of difference. So there was no
real
explanation. So then I started looking at the causes that were delayed. So clearly it was not something about the place or the state or the person who delayed it or the party which delayed it. So then on what basis were these elections delayed? That's what I naturally questioned next. And this is, I think, something that we knew of, but raised a kind of an alarm, and that was almost, again, 60% of the elections that were delayed. So now I'm talking about just the delayed elections. Out of all the elections that were delayed, 60% of them were because of some conflict, disagreement with delimitation and reservation.
Okay.
So might be worth a minute to talk about what this exactly is, right? I'm sure most listeners would know, but delimitation is more about how you draw boundaries of your constituencies as and when areas like expand. For example, in the Lok Sabha, the delimitation has been fixed for so long. We have like these 540, 542, 544. We had some nominated seats. I think now it's removed. But whatever these kind of seats are, the way the boundaries of the constituencies have been drawn, that's called delimitation, and that's been fixed. And at the national level, it sits with the election commission, probably the government power. But then it happens very rarely. Like you're not always redrawing boundaries, right? Your constituency is your constituency. But for the local corporations, every time there's an election, because the state government by and large has been given the power to notify the delimitation, every time it looks like they're trying to redraw boundaries and gerrymander. In the US, it's called gerrymandering. If you think that some area has, you have two losing, if you're in power, you're the state government in power, and you think 2 areas are kind of your weaker areas and you're losing them, and adjacent to them there are 2 bigger areas where you can win, they'll think about how do I redraw these boundaries so that the majority of people who are against me will now become a minority. I break them up into 2 different wards, I delimit them that way, and now I have a greater chance of winning. And now the party in power is doing this, but the party in opposition was also once in power and they did this previously. So now they know it is done. So when the party in power does this, the party in the opposition says, hey, this is wrong, you can't do this, you're being, intentionally, there's no basis. They'll say, where's your caste survey? On what basis? They'll challenge that in court. State government will again reply in court saying that we need, more time. And then the other thing is reservation.
Okay.
In the local bodies, almost 50% or higher, again this varies from state by state, is reserved for either your backward classes, SC, ST. So whatever the rationale for that, that's not in conversation here, but whatever the rationale was, that maybe to, at least in the lower forms of governance, give them more of a chance to uplift themselves, the society, whatever the rationale. I don't think we're debating that today, but implementation of that is also misused. So if in my area, I'm a very strong candidate of the opposition party, and now the state party in power knows that, and they want to win, and they know I am a general category male, they will announce that ward as reserved for SC category female. And they will do this, announce this 1 month before the election. And I know that it's being done intentionally because I have also done it in the past. And when they announce that, I will challenge it. I will say, hey, what basis are you doing this on? I will go to court. And then
that will take time.
That will take time. And then there'll be some riots on the day of the election. Polling won't happen. And then it'll happen again. Or, it may not even go to that point. Someone will challenge it. Election will be withheld. So this was an eye-opening result, which is that for elections to be delayed, it does not matter whether you're rich, you're poor, you're lower caste or higher caste or whatever talk about. It doesn't matter whether you're in an economically good belt. Climate doesn't matter. Party doesn't matter. National, regional doesn't matter. But what matters is that the state government in power is getting a chance to set this delimitation reservation, which is causing conflicts, which is being misused, and which is eventually being taken to court. And courts say, hey, you cannot delay anymore, do the election. But they are directing the state government, but the state government is not doing it. So what? This does not happen for the state and national elections because the Central Election Commission is a completely autonomous body.
Right.
They have their funds. Sure, one may still argue that, okay, there's some influence from the union government, but honestly, nothing on paper. I mean, nothing on paper at least. Here, on paper, there is. On paper, the
state governments have full control.
State governments have control over when the election should be and the delimitation, the reservation. The state election commissions, which are the SECs, are just not as independent as the CEC. So even for the court may tell the state election commission, do the election. But if the government doesn't cooperate, they can't do anything.
Right.
They can't,
Yeah, that has been the case, right? So in Pune, they filed PLI, I think it's called PIL, sorry, in the High Court to say that there has been delays in the municipal election, and the High Court said, hey, you need to conduct elections. But still, I mean, the High Court just directing or just saying that doesn't, hasn't influence. The state government needs to back it up, and state government needs to execute it. So,
yeah, absolutely. So just looking at the data, it was like 22% delimitation reservation pending, not announced, so it was delayed. 21% there was delay in delimitation, it was not even done. 17% issues with reservation. So it was delimitation was done, and reservation was announced, but there were issues. And then 12% was opposition to merger expansion. So now every corporation to delay, they'll say, okay, now we are bigger, we'll take all these surrounding areas, will become a corporation. Each of those areas will say, oh, we don't want to be here, or we want to be here. So that kind of a local, dispute.
Those disputes come up.
So basically not enough standardization and objective analysis of what should happen when you expand, and how should you redraw, how often should you redraw these boundaries, who should do it, are they independent enough? So in terms of like all the reasons for delay, it was only like 4 to 8% which had some other issue like internal security issue or some or some. There were about 12% of elections which were delayed due to crisis, natural calamity. Like COVID was one example. In some other areas, maybe some, local insurgent attack. So some of these factors which are what people associate with delays. Like earlier days, when I used to tell someone Bengaluru election is delayed, they would be like, oh, it's because of COVID, right? Like it's going to happen after COVID. But no, it was only like 12% all over India, which was a crisis.
In these 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. So that was, I think, the biggest learning, that no other factor is correlated as much as just issues, disagreements with delimitation and reservation and political will. And if you include even the opposition to merger and expansion, it's a total of 12 plus 9 plus 60. So that's like almost, I'm just looking at the data here. Yeah, so almost 80% of the elections are delayed just because the body in charge of conducting this election did not have the political will and was not able to, did not have the resources, and there was some dispute, and that was the main reason elections didn't happen. So yeah, that's the biggest takeaway.
Right, and it's a difficult problem to solve, right? Because it mainly stems from the state government having too much control and then intentionally delaying or intentionally causing, poking the other party, poking other stakeholders, and which will in turn cause these delays. So let's look at, just to hypothesize here, or just to let's put a hypothetical question. will this be solved by an independent body, like, say, for example, the Election Commission,
Yeah.
which not just regulates elections but regulates urban local bodies in general? So,
Yeah.
what might happen? So, it's very hypothetical. What might happen if we take away state control on ULBs and give it to some autonomous body, probably in the control, probably reporting to the union government? Do they have enough incentives to carry that out, or will that run into the same problems, or is it the main problem of they not knowing enough about urban local bodies to
Yeah.
implement those solutions?
I think in some sense, you've hit the nail on the head, because that was kind of the conclusion that I was going towards, which is that, and it's a paradox in some sense. Look, 35 years now, we committed to a model. We said that, look, local urban governance is important. And by the way, we have been speaking about corporations, all of this. Now the same extends to other urban bodies, probably even
smaller
rural
ones,
bodies.
yeah.
We
Might
should
be even
keep that.
worse.
Yeah, we should keep that in mind. Might be worse, might be better. But just talking about now local governance as it is, right? Like a broader, we learned a lot from these corporation data and urban local data, but just local governance in general, right? For 35 years now, we have always recognized that it's important. For 35 years, we implemented this 73rd Amendment, which was for rural local governance, 74th Amendment, which was for urban local governance. And the spirit of the Constitution was, I would say, very worthy and very noble. When they implemented it, they said that, okay, this is important. We'll give you a framework. And because all of you states are diverse, you may want to create your own laws, your own rules, your own act and enforce it differently. We'll allow you to do that. So then they gave the framework and they said, you legislate. But now, I think in theory, it was a great idea because, again, as I said, we're a federal setup. All the states want autonomy. That was probably a good idea. But I think it's high time that there is general widespread acceptance that this has failed.
This doesn't work. Yeah.
And we have to say that there is a bigger problem here. So the next time, I have in fact started, every time someone talks about corporation, they say, hey, municipal finance is not that strong, that's the problem. Someone will say, oh, your cities are too big, that's the problem. Someone will say, politicians are bad, that's the problem. No, I feel like now, no matter what reason or excuse is there for bad local governance or urban governance, I feel like it's all coming down to the bigger picture of what is the system that governs it, allowing it to do. So that's where I'm saying that I think the solution to this urban local governance problem is, in fact, the more I think about it, and I've been thinking about it for the past year now, a lot of research that I did and the questions I came out with were from the point of view of, okay, what's the solution and what can I do to make sure, it happens? And that's when I realized that there's nothing I individually can do or anyone can do. Whereas I think it's high time we call it out for what it is.
Okay.
The local governance problem is not, as I said, a Chennai problem or a Bangalore problem, but rather it is an India problem. It's not just a Delhi problem or a Telangana problem, because it is a national problem. And the situation today, was made possible by the union legislation from 1992 onwards. What can fix it is also that. So that's what I really believe, which is the solution lies in a change in the framework that governs urban local body elections and probably even rural elections. But I'm not an expert on that, so I'll refrain from commenting. But the central legislation that governs this. So it's what you said. I think we need a law that needs to be passed in the Lok Sabha, in the Rajya Sabha, and needs to become an amendment. The laws should kind of standardize the type of local governance, standardize terms, standardize what's the power of the mayor, what's the power of the corporation, where will they get their budget from, what percentage of budget should be given, maybe fix that to peg that to population. We need a central legislation saying what you said, right? The Central Election Commission is kind of strong and empowered. what's preventing us from making all the other state election commissions also as empowered?
Right.
We can bring every single SEC under the Central Election Commission, give it independent, autonomy. It's not like we don't know how to structure an organization that can, work at the national level and then, tire down. We have all that experience. So, and we don't lack the bureaucracy to do that. We have a very strong bureaucracy, and that's known. So, the law needs to standardize urban local elections, make the state election commissions more independent, put laws on how often can you upgrade a corporation or can you expand a corporation. Say that it's to be done once in 20 years or 10 years if you want. Even better, right? Like, it's better than what's happening right now, where every election there's just like a debate. Put a thing on who will comprise of the delimitation and the reservation committee. Get people from other parties, make it a committee, put a timeline, they vote on it, whatever they decide, gets done. So bringing in more autonomy, more centralized legislation, saying that you will have a mayor, this will be their functions, this is when the election will happen.
Better,
I mean, it's definitely not going to make things worse, and it's definitely going to make things better. So I think that centralization of legislation, paradoxically, is what's required to make decentralized governance a success. And that was my biggest takeaway. Now, whether the people who have the power to do this have the political will to do it or not is the next question. So now, if I am a Modi sitting in, the Lok Sabha, and there's the BJP government, we have all our legislators, ministers, for them to bring such a law and push it through and make such a major reform, they will face backlash from their own party MLAs, for example. And now,
because they control a lot of state governments.
They control a lot of state governments. So now, if they need to do anything, they will face some backlash. They can't make their MLAs happy, because when their elections come, the MLAs work a lot to make it happen. So the problem is political will. I think that anyone who even listens to the problem for 15-20 minutes, understands what's the problem, what's the solution, will more or less agree that yes, you need kind of uniform centralized laws that govern these bodies so that things happen on time, they work in a structured manner. But now the bigger question is, the people who can make it happen, do they have the political will or not?
I mean, that is the biggest problem, because you'll write a bunch of policy solutions, but if the ones who need to implement it won't, then I mean, there is no
absolutely. And I think that's the kind of question that I'm thinking about today and grappling with, because see, my interest in local governance started as a young guy who just wanted to do things, fix local problems. Then I thought, okay, let me focus just on Bengaluru. I'll make my city a good place, work with organizations just working in Bengaluru, and it's a great idea and have some impact. But now I'm thinking that the problem is much bigger. So now we need a national solution to this problem. So I think it's interesting. So my hope is that over the years, I'm just one person, but there are probably, in fact, definitely many people across the country, civic society folks and researchers who have identified, who would agree. So at some point, there should be a big consensus, there should be a lobby, maybe enough people realize that this is a problem and this type of a solution can fix it. And I'm not optimistic, but let's say I'm hopeful, because India has in the past seen some legislation being driven by public demand. And I was recently speaking to a friend, and he was asking me, hey, you say that people in power are not interested in bringing this reform. How did the RTI come through? Right? Such a big thing, such a move in terms of transparency, accountability. I'm sure there were a lot of people who were upset with RTI coming together, but it did, right? It found a way. It took time. It was implemented. Same for your GST or liberalization of the economy. So much resistance, but it took a visionary, it took a lobby, there was a right time for the right thing, right moment, right things led up to it. And then there was some change, and then there might have been a lot of resistance at that point, but down the line you can see it was a success and it did things, right? So I guess, India is far from being a perfect democracy, but we do hold our democracy very valuable. And my hope is, and that's the last thing I can say on it, and my hope is that there will be a time in the very near recent, in the near future, where there is a demand for changing this legislation, making things stronger, making things better, making the laws that govern urban governance better, and that in turn will have a ripple effect and making day-to-day life better, for all the citizens. So I think that's my hope, and over the next few years, I think I will think about how I can do my bit to further that cause, and my hope is that a lot more people around the country realize this and want to push this and support this. So I think I rest my case with that.
No, that's a nice hopeful case. But also, like, last question, because you actually did a good conclusion there. But what is a jugadu solution? If, let's say that this won't happen, or this won't happen for the next 15 years, how do you, what is a workaround if, to say you're in Bangalore and you are a citizen who wants a group of citizens who wants there to be elections? Who do you pitch to? What do you propose?
That is an awesome question, because the workaround is that it's nice because it takes us exactly to the start of our conversation. If the people in power don't fix it by themselves, the people who are affected by it need to take to the streets. So that is my jugadu solution. So if the election doesn't happen in Bangalore, and tomorrow, if 1 lakh citizens of Bengaluru come out on the streets and say that, hey, where's our election? You wait and watch. In 2 months, the election will be done. Right? But the other way of getting this is building that political demand. So if someone like me is interested to, do something about this, then probably we should put all our efforts in educating people, convincing them that, hey, there is a local corporation. It impacts your life. You should care about it. Do you know that it's not here in place? We need it. And then once you convince people and you're able to generate that political demand, at the end of the day, we are also a populist democracy. If the voters want something, the person who wants the votes will do whatever they can to get it done, right? So that is my other hope. If there's no national level solution coming in quickly, at least in these areas where people are affected, bottom up, if there can be some kind of a movement, a revolution, people ask for it, people demand it, people come out to the streets, then there can be some change.
Wow. Thanks for listening, everyone. This was an amazing conversation. Felt like it's 5 minutes you're talking, but thanks for listening. Thank you, Rishi, for coming here today. It was a really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Same here. Always, fun talking about something like this, and hope that whoever has listened to this will play some part in some way at some time to make the situation better. Thanks, Miheer.
Right. Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.